magazine. It's the foremost military magazine. And I thought, you know, it was going to be, I was naive. I was working in the terrorism area at the time, though, and so I thought, well, I'm going to go and hear a lot about the threats, which threats are the, you know, the most severe and that sort of thing. And I got there, and it was James telling all these, it's mainly government people from agencies, non-security agencies like NIH and all these other agencies, that how to get government funding for their projects and how to spin their grants so that, you know, NIH, if they were doing biological research, they had to make it related to biological weapons, because at the time Bill Clinton had read this book on some novel about biological weapons, and he got really interested in this. So if you remember, clear back in the late Clinton administration, these terrorism scares started because chemical and biological weapons were all over the CNN and the other news channels, because the president became interested in the threat. So of course all these people were trying to get government or get more funding for their agency's efforts, and it was quite an astounding thing. Even before 9/11, this was occurring. Now, what is the actual threat? Well, you know, Ian was mentioning that it's not as great as being portrayed, and I think if you look at statistics, which I always like to look at statistics, because social scientists have a term called probability neglect, and the public has probability neglect. In other words, they're more scared of getting AIDS or getting struck by terrorism than they are driving 75 miles down the freeway without a seatbelt, which is, of course, much more dangerous than any of those things. So John Mueller, a political scientist at Ohio State University in Foreign Affairs a year or so ago, I think, I can't remember the exact issue date, he calculated that the average American has a 1 in 80,000 chance of ever being killed by an international terrorist during their lifetime. Now, of course, if they don't live abroad, or if they don't live in Washington, D.C. or New York, the chances are even much lower than that. Most anti-U.S. terrorist attacks occur overseas at U.S. embassies, military bases, that sort of thing, not here at home. In fact, I went back many years and looked at before they discontinued the report, before it got too embarrassing after the terrorism spiked after 9/11, that there was a report called The Patterns of Global Terrorism by the State Department. And if you went through all those reports year after year, you quickly found that North America always had the lowest numbers of attacks, like 0 or 1, or, you know, most years not any at all. So when the president tells us that our great efforts at counterterrorism and anti-terrorism have led to to no attacks since 9/11, you have to say, well, you know, that's kind of like saying, well, I haven't been struck by lightning today. I mean, because a terrorist strike is a rare event. The last major one before that in the U.S. was in 1993 at the same building, the World Trade Center attack. So, of course, the bureaucracy would turn that around and say, well, we better be careful. You know, it's been 8 years it was 8 years between those two attacks, and next year is the 8th year. But, of course, we know that terrorism is not regular like that. But the point is, in North America, it's very hard for terrorists to operate. They have a long logistical line of supply. There are not a lot of radical groups to provide cover, et cetera. And so I think we have to put the threat into perspective. And I think there's a self-protection instinct in humans that makes them risk-averse. So, and that's why you have probability neglect, because of biological and it's in the genes of humans to stay alive, and so they're risk-averse. And when the government and security bureaucracies tell them, well, you must be aware and must be scared about these things, of course, they're going to be scared. And we were mentioning, Gareth was mentioning some of these things that are justified on the basis of the war on terror. I mean, the war on terror is fairly cheap to fight in military terms. You have intelligence, need special forces, drones, maybe more human intelligence agents in the CIA and military. But we're building 3 fighter aircrafts, new submarines, new destroyers, a future combat system, which is a follow-on to a tank. And many of these things don't really have a role in fighting terrorism or a marginal role. Now, it's fine if we need these things for other reasons, but you know, the budget has been pumped up on the basis of the fears of security, on the basis of the fears of Al-Qaeda and that sort of thing, more terrorist attack. So, of course, getting rid of the war moniker would help reduce terrorism, save money, and avoid turning our country into a police state. But getting rid of the war term must also be accompanied by less use of public military force and more reliance on law enforcement, intelligence, and on the rare occasion, military action in the shadows. And I also think the U.S. should concentrate on Al-Qaeda, the people that are attacking us, which seems to be a basic point in military strategy and tactics, is that you want to focus on the person or the country or the group that attacked you and not everyone else. I always say that if Bush would have been president in 1941 and the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the Nazis declared war on us, he would have attacked Argentina, which, you know, it makes no sense at all. So I think we have to fight the enemy that is attacking us. And we're only falling into bin Laden's trap by going into Iraq. And I also think we're falling into bin Laden's trap by continuing the occupation of Afghanistan and trying to nation build there. We can go after bin Laden without doing that. And I'm not big on the failed state thesis, because I think more empirical studies have to be done, but just because states are in the failed state category, it doesn't necessarily mean they're havens for terrorism. Given the statistically low odds of an attack, it seems that as bad as the occasional contingent terrorist attack may be, we may have more to fear from the government's permanent response to it than the actual terrorism itself. I once had a colleague, I was working in the military security bureaucracy, and I was back in the 80s, and I was a hardliner on terrorism. And I had a friend, and we would always argue, and there was some terrorist attack against a U.S. facility overseas, and back then I would have said, you know,